My name's Emma Barnes. I'm an interior decorator and joint managing director of Sibyl, Colefax and John Fowler. I love the fact that you come from just a regular little village street through a small door and then suddenly you're in this space and it feels, for me, very magical. Sort of disconnect from London life when I come in, and the garden is here, and whether it's sunny or raining, it's something just so magical. My shoulders relax. When I inherited the house from my parents, who'd had it for 52 years, I'd had quite a lot of time to think about what I'd like to do to it. And I made quite a few changes almost immediately. It was emotional in some ways because I knew the effort that they'd put into it, and I felt slightly guilty for changing things. But my mother's version of the house had been more of an old vicarage, and I wanted to reflect more of the original feel of the building. I revealed the beams in the kitchen. I softened the corners of the plasterwork. And originally, because it was to store a cart for the horses, the central doorway was a solid door, and that made the hall incredibly dark. And I had the idea of turning the door into shutters that would fold back, and then installing a glazed screen and a lovely glazed door with a low panel in it. And that changed the house dramatically. It created this wonderful sense of arrival and a lot of joy. It's another room, really. For me, it's very sparsely furnished. I've got quite a lot of paintings. The couple outside the drawing room are old relies, and they were separated for many years. My mother had Mr. Daniels and somebody else had Mrs. Daniels, and it was quite nice. I was able to reunite them. Absolutely love old trunks. I bought this one in another grand attic sale. The label's gone, but it used to say never to be removed, which made me laugh because clearly it was removed when I bought it from them. The hall curtains are a pattern from Sibyl, Colefax and John Fowler, and it's one that Nancy Lancaster had in her house at Hazley. They frame the garden beautifully. It's a really nice to have a downstairs loo. This is possibly the smallest downstairs loo in the world, tucked under the stairs. And because it's so small, I used a corner basin. I found a reclaimed one and put a skirt around it, not to see the nasty pipework. I love flagstones in a hall. As a floor, I think they're fantastic. And these are lovely old ones that my mother found in a reclamation yard. And I have matched them as closely as possible when I added in a flagstone floor to the kitchen. I wanted the kitchen to feel much more of a room than the kitchen it had been in my mother's time. Because as the house only has sort of 2 rooms downstairs and the hall, the kitchen is not only a kitchen, but it's the dining room, it's where you read the newspaper. It has to perform a lot of tasks. Putting in the Argo was completely and utterly life-changing. It's just the most welcoming thing when you get her on a Friday. It used to be the fact that there was a gas stove in here and we'd light it on a Friday night, and by Sunday evening when we were leaving, the room would have just about warmed up to enable you to take your overcoat off. Anyway, this has made all the difference in the world and is lovely. And I've got a great collection of dogs on the windowsill, which are Cavalier King Charles Spaniels. They ought really to be pugs, but I haven't come across any yet. If I do, I'll replace this lot. One of the things I planned when I was organising the kitchen was a larder. It's really incredibly useful to have a place behind a door where you can A, store things, and B, put things so that it's out of sight. I wanted the kitchen to feel as if it had always been here, and so it was painted to look very worn in. Lovely girls who painted sort of black bits under the paint and then rubbed it back, and so it looked as if it had years of wear. And then somebody came and they said, "Oh, how nice your kitchen is. What colour are you going to paint it? It's so sort of looks so tatty." I was like, "Oh, it's cost a lot of money to look this cheap." And I found these wonderful tiles through a friend in Norfolk, and they're all religious scenes, which is rather unusual for a kitchen, but they're so decorative and lovely. So this kitchen is filled with pattern. I've got the most lovely curtains, I think, which are a sort of pinkish beige. And then when we reprinted the lilies and geraniums chintz, I had to recover the wing chair in that. And then the seat covers of these dining chairs wore out, so I then decided to cover them in our leopard stripe. And then I thought how nice it would be to have the patchwork as a tablecloth. I know it's sort of pattern-centric, but somehow I find it all very harmonious and very happy together. I think I inherited my love of blue and white china from Roger Banks Pye, who is obsessed with blue and white. And he and I bought up all the blue and white check napkins in John Lewis's to make the curtains in his breakfast room. I think that his influence on my decorating is huge. He was insistent that things were comfortable, but they were always enjoyable. I think you can never make a dark room light, but you can make it very interesting and very lovely. The windows aren't very big in this room, and so I painted the walls this colour, which is an archive colour of Farrow and Ball called chemise, and it's a really lovely sort of muddy grey. Pictures in here mostly came from an attic sale at West Wickham Park some years ago. There are 4 Turner engravings, and then the other one, the big one, is the Relief of Lucknow above the sofa. And I painted the frame to almost match the walls because originally it had a black frame and it was just too jumpy. I wanted to have a chimney piece which would feel right for the room, and I thought a stone would be lovely, also in sort of the Cotswolds or edge of the Cotswolds. And I love a Belection moulding. And I also love a chimney piece that doesn't have a shelf, because I think people always clutter up the shelves of a mantelpiece and put things on it which then live there forevermore. This room has got a number of patterns in it, and there's the lovely jardiniere pattern on that armchair, which came from Robert Kime many years ago and just gets nicer and nicer the more it kind of mulches down. The collection of paperweights came about because I had a few, and then I started to notice them in boot sales or in markets. And so then I think also people started to think, aha, she collects paperweights, so I'd be gifted a few. I've got to the finite number now because they fit across the table. Having a corner fireplace is lovely, but somehow you need the rest of the room to reflect that and to make sense with it. So I found a corner cupboard originally for my mother. For me, it just completes this sort of side of the room, and it's a nice balance with the fireplace. It is full of tchotchkes. It needs a jolly good edit, I must say. This is my bedroom. I would describe this room as being a bit Anne of Green Gables. It's up in the attic, and there's nothing more lovely actually than sleeping in the eaves, and you have the sound of the weather on the outside. Sometimes you hear the old squirrels scuttling by or the rain. It's very lovely and it feels very, very cosy. Occasionally I hit my head on a beam, but I get over it. I built low bookcases under the eaves on one side of the room to contain a large quantity of books which had been in my grandparents' house in a bedroom that I used to sleep in when I was a child. And the bed is made up with sheets made by my good friend Janie Cruz Garnett, who was at university with my daughter. And I love the fact that she painted flowers from her garden and then had them made up into sheets, and they're just so pretty. I love eiderowns on beds. I think they're just so delicious. And this is lined in cashmere, which is luxurious but not very practical with the moth population being what it is. I've got a little collection of mother of pearl boxes on the chest of drawers in the window. I think what's particularly pretty is the way the light catches them, and they have a little sort of iridescence and charm. Again, I think it's a perfect example of, I wouldn't have one of those boxes on its own, but all together I find them adorable. An armchair covered in an ancient Colefax chintz, which sadly discontinued. Needlepoint cushion on top of that. A rug with much pattern and a patchwork quilt. Yes, perhaps there is rather more pattern than I realise. But somehow when pattern is harmonious, it disappears. This bathroom has been much Instagrammed, I must say, and had a lot of likes. So the inspiration behind this bathroom was, it's a tiny room, so why not smother the walls with a pattern? And this is an old Colefax wallpaper, which has been reproduced recently, happily, I think probably thanks to my Instagramming this bathroom. It's had a reprieve, and it's so pretty. And again, I just covered it with all these old, funny little pictures that I had, that when they're all together, they kind of make a nice pattern on the wall. On their own, they perhaps don't stand up to much. Well, this was another junk shop find, and it didn't have a basin in it originally, and so I had the top cut to receive the basin, and luckily the marble survived, didn't shatter. So on the windowsill is this amazing overscaled conch of an incredible colour, and it also makes a very good screen on the window. It had an outing last year to the Wow House, where it joined one that Benedict Foley has got, and he used them in the hallway. So I thought about how I was going to use this barn for years, and I could never really figure out how I could get a bedroom in here, an office, a bathroom. And one of the things I loved so much about the barn was the volume and the ceiling height. And I suddenly, in a kind of lightning moment, realised that I could build 2 partitions, which would be made from bookcases, and then basically 2 platforms on top of the bookcases, which would give me the bedroom and the office space, and then tuck underneath that, one side, a bathroom and the little bar. And it was sort of so deeply pleasing, and it was one of those things where once I thought about it, I thought, how could I have not thought of that before? How ridiculous, this is such an obvious solution. Because it still gives me a lot of floor space to have 2 sofas, big armoire which hides our huge telly, and yet the kind of accommodation I wanted to create and the storage. I could have a kitchenette in this barn, but instead I have a bar, which I think is much more fun. This is much more of an entertaining space, really. And I like the fact also that it's hidden with the book door. So it's a bit of a prohibition bar, which is ridiculous given that there's a large drinks table next to it. But it's such fun to have that moment of discovery when the door swings open and you see the amazing ceiling painted by my friend Joshua Hale, which is just very cool indeed. I don't think you need a huge amount of space if it's well organised. I think you can cram in a lot of stuff. I think back to being honest about what it is you want from your space and how you're going to use it. The most important thing for me about decorating is the soul of a house and the background that a house or an apartment makes for the people who live there. Colour and design is really important too, but I think if the volume of a space isn't happy, it doesn't really matter how much money you chuck at curtains. And sometimes I think the nicest curtains anyway are made from ticking or something inexpensive that you've found in a market. John Fowler was a past master at using parachute silk during the war when it wasn't rationed, or lovely red and white striped cotton from nurses' uniforms to make lampshades and decorative pieces. So it's about how you put things together more than about what they are. I remember vividly the first time I saw this house, and I thought, gosh, what fun. I love the idea of getting to grips with it and making it into a house. I think every sort of child's dream, isn't it, of making a house out of something. We make Wendy houses in the gardens, we make dens, we make, camps under the dining room table. And so for me, it was an extension of that. I think I've spent my entire life actually playing house.